So we're starting a new series today. We're going to spend 9 weeks in the book of Ecclesiastes. Does that just make you go, woo? But Ecclesiastes is a great book, and it is a little different. We're going to spend some time in it. We're starting out a series called Chasing After the Wind. It'll be our summer series in the book of Ecclesiastes. And I want to start off by asking you to think about fairy tales. You know, some of you are parents with young kids. You read fairy tales. We've all had them. We've all heard them. How does a fairy tale end? It has a very famous line, and they lived. And for those of you who paid attention in middle school history class, our preamble to our Constitution has a line in it that talks about life, liberty, and the happiness, right? So we grow up from a young age thinking about happiness, living happily ever after, right? And we think because our Constitution says so, we have a right to be happy. It is how it's going to be. It's how it should be, right? But if we live life for very long, we know that not all our moments are happy. Not all the seasons of our life are happy. And Ecclesiastes very much stands up in the face of the idea that life is going to be happy. It is one of the 3 books of wisdom. It falls in between its siblings of Proverbs and the Song of Solomon. It is unlike its siblings, and in fact, it is unlike any other book in the Bible. And people, when they read it, they go, oh my goodness, it's so heavy, it's so dark, it's doom. And what do we do with things that sort of ring to be gloom and doom to us? We avoid them, right? We, say, oh, well, I'd rather read something else. And that's what the church has often done throughout history, is to kind of avoid Ecclesiastes. But we're not, obviously, avoiding Ecclesiastes. We're taking rather more the view of pastor-teacher Dr. Ed Young, who said, when teaching the Bible, Ecclesiastes ought to be the first thing we teach, because all of the rest of Scripture answers the questions that Ecclesiastes asks. And so that's what we are going to be doing over the next 9 weeks. We're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes and then other places that answer the questions that the teacher asks. So let's get started with reading the first 11 verses of Ecclesiastes. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. See what I mean? What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning to it on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, or the ear to fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which we can say, look, this is something new? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. And on that happy note, we are going to pray. Lord, the book of Ecclesiastes we know can be challenging, but you have put it in your word for a reason. And so today we come to look at your word. and we look at the challenges that Ecclesiastes presents to us. And I pray that you will help us to seek out and explore the answers that you have for us in other parts of your word. Amen. In the book Groundhog Day, Bill Murray plays a character, Phil the Weatherman, and he presides over the Groundhog Day festivities. But then he finds himself trapped in an endless loop of February 2nd. And no matter what happens, it is never February 3rd, it is always Groundhog Day. And he responds to his dilemma at first by parties and women. And then he tries a crime spree. And then he seeks out knowledge and new skills and tries to improve himself. And then he falls into a depression. And I'm not going to spoil it in case you haven't seen it. But in this process, we find Phil the Weatherman in a bowling alley with a couple of guys who probably are not on their first beer. Let's take a look.
You know, some guys would look at this glass and they would say, that glass is half empty. Other guys would say, that glass is half full. I think you was a glass is half empty kind of guy, am I right?
What would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was exactly the same and nothing that you did mattered?
That about sums it up for me.
That sums it up for me. And as I looked at this clip on YouTube and I looked at the comments, there was a number of people who said, yeah, that's it. That sums it up for me. That's how it is. That's how I feel. That's what I think. It's kind of sad to think that. But let's be honest. Let's be real. How many of us at some point in time in life have felt that way? Have asked, what's the point? Maybe it was a short-lived period of time where you were struggling with something that no matter what you did, it never seemed to come out right. And you asked yourself, what's the point? For others of you, it may have been a question you asked for years. What's the meaning? What's the purpose? What's the point? And you spent a lot of years searching. And there may even be a few in here today that you're still asking that question, and that's what brought you here today. And so I hope that over the next 9 weeks, we can help to address some of the answers to that question. We're going to spend a little extra time in each of the first 3 verses because they set up so much of the rest of the book. So verse 1 tells us, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, exactly who this is, there is some debate. So we're going to go with what we really know for sure. That this is a person, let's face it, probably a guy, a man, who has wealth and prosperity and intelligence and has the means of which to search out a lot of life's questions. And so he can speak authoritatively on this subject is how he comes across. We're going to call him the teacher, or we're going to use the term that is the actual Hebrew term and which most scholars use if you read about Ecclesiastes, and that's the word Koheleth. So if I use that, it kind of interchangeable with teacher. It just kind of makes you sound smarter when you say it. So those are the words we'll be using. And then verse 2, we hear, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. So let's take a look at that word. The word that we have here is hevel, and it's hevel of hevels, and it comes in a dual. And when you see words in a dual, like Holy of Holies or Lord of Lords, it means the utmost of the utmost, so the holiest of holy places. Here, the most meaningless of all meaningless things. Hevel of hevels. And this word appears 37, 38. There's a little, depends on who you ask. It appears a lot in the book of Ecclesiastes. It also appears in Proverbs and Psalms. And it is translated quite a number of different ways, and it has a lot of different nuances that we can see there. Meaningless, vanity, futile, breath, vapor, fleeting, absurd. And I even came across one suggestion that I'm not comfortable repeating in church. You can let your mind go there. So we have a lot of different things that this word could be. But what I want you to imagine and picture, to put an image to this word, is I want you to imagine a cold winter's day. I know on a day like today it's a stretch. But a cold winter's day, and you breathe. What do you see? You see your breath, right? But you cannot grab it. You cannot grasp it. You cannot shape it, mold it. And it's gone. That is what Hevel is. That is what this word is that we are using and has been translated here as meaningless and all these other places as different things. It's vapor, breath, gone. And verse 3 then sets up the question of Ecclesiastes. In verse 3, we see, what do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? And a couple more important words. And this word gain that is used, it can also mean profit or surplus. It's not used anywhere else in Scripture, only in Ecclesiastes. And the phrase under the sun is also only used in Ecclesiastes. And it gives Hevel a run for its money. It appears 30 times in Ecclesiastes. We see it over and over again. And so I'd say it's pretty important for us to understand what it means. Under the sun. On earth, this side of heaven, the physical life. Some would even say life without God. So that is what we're talking about with life under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. So the teacher in verses 4 through 7 focuses on the cosmos, the rising of the sun. It rises, it sets, it rises, it sets. On and on it goes. The wind, it blows from the north to the south. It blows all over, but it never really goes anywhere, right? It never says, oh, I've arrived, I'm here, I'm done. And the streams that flow from the mountains and into the sea, but the sea never fills up. And through the course of evaporation, up it rises and back it goes to the beginning, and it's just this endless loop. It's Groundhog Day. What's the point? Over and over again. And so he paints that imagery. And I don't know about anybody else in the room, but when I think of that, I think of laundry and dishes. Right? Am I right? As soon as you're done emptying that dishwasher or emptying that dryer, there's more there waiting to be washed, right? It's endless. And you sometimes might go, what's the point? Oh, I need dishes to eat off of and clothes to wear. So that's the point. But all joking aside, here the teacher has taken creation and used it as an illustration for how things are futile, meaningless, pointless, endless. On and on they go. Why do they matter? And then in verses 8 through 11, he turns the tone to humanity itself. The eye sees, but it's never full of seeing. The ear is never full of hearing. And in verse 9, we see our phrase again that we had seen, but now in a different context. There is nothing new under the sun. There's our phrase again, under the sun. And we live in an age of technology. So we might say, well, we see new things all the time. There's new gadgets and gizmos every day, right? You can go to Best Buy or the Apple Store and all kinds of new things, right? But that's not what this is talking about. This is following a passage talking about creation. And every time we discover something new scientifically and we think, oh, this is new, no, it's not. It's always been there. It's maybe the first time we've ever experienced it or discovered it, but it's not new. It's been there since the beginning of creation. Nothing is actually new, no matter what we think about it. Recently, my husband and I had the pleasure and the privilege of traveling in the Mediterranean. And we got to go to places that are the seat of civilization. Not the seat of humanity, but the seat of civilization. We got to see Athens and Rhodes and Malta. Places with history that went back more than 2,000 years before Christ. And you could see the evidence and the history of empire after empire after empire, from the Athenians to the Romans to the Turks to the Crusaders to Napoleon and the French to Mussolini and the Italians to Hitler and the Germans. All this history in this one place. And thinking about that trip and thinking about this passage of Scripture, it makes me think about how every one of these empires was trying to establish themselves. They were trying to be in control. They were trying to harness power. And no matter what they did, time went on and they were replaced by some other empire over and over again. And then when you think about the lives of these leaders, whether it be from Alexander the Great to Adolf Hitler, and you think about this period of time of well over 4,000 years, each of their lives was just a blip in history. We might remember some of their names, but in the end, they live and they die just like any of us regular old folks. And so we might say, well, really, yeah, okay, what is the point? What is the meaning? What is the purpose? Well, remember I said the rest of Scripture answers those questions. And so we're going to take a look at just a few verses. Obviously, there's a way more than I'm going to look at because we have 8 more weeks and just a few more minutes. So we are going to settle on a few verses. Romans 1 tells us, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. So in this passage, we saw that Koheleth talked about creation, right? He was focused on a few things in creation and not on the big picture. And when you take and you look at the big picture of creation, the wonder, the majesty in the huge scale down to the tiny little intricate details. Creation isn't meant to be a model of futility. It's meant to be an example of the Creator. It's meant to point us to worship the one who set it all in motion. It is an imagery of the constants of God, not the futility of humanity. Ephesians 4:17, so I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. Think about the time in which Paul's writing. He's talking in the empire of the Greeks and the Romans, but it's Greek philosophy that still reigns. It's Greek thinking where really they worshipped knowledge, philosophy, and thought. And Paul is saying, don't put yourself there in the futility of knowledge. We're not supposed to worship knowledge. We're supposed to worship the one who created knowledge. There are a lot of good things that God created. Knowledge, food, relationships, all of these things. But when we take a good thing and we make it a God thing, it becomes a bad thing. So when we take creation or we take knowledge or we take food or we take relationships and they are what we worship, we take a gift of God and turn it into something else. 1 Peter 1, for you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through him you believe in God, who has raised him from the dead and glorified him, and so your faith and hope are in God. Remember, gain, profit, that was what the teacher was seeking after. And here, Peter reminds us it was not by gain were material things in which we were redeemed. We were not redeemed by silver and gold. We were redeemed by the precious blood of Christ. And in that is where we find faith and hope, not in profit or gain. And one last verse, words from Jesus himself, as he said, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So here Jesus reminds us that our focus is not supposed to be on life under the sun, life on earth. Our focus is not supposed to be on profit and gain, but on things beyond that, where we are storing up treasures in heaven, eternal things, a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Relationships with one another that will go on in that time. That is where we are to invest ourselves. And of course, we have 8 more weeks to look at this and more answers to these questions and more ways of exploring that. So I invite you to come back when you're here and when you're in town and dig into the book of Ecclesiastes with us, because it is in the answers to the teacher's questions that we find the faith and the hope that is in Jesus Christ. Let's pray.